very much, Elaine. And now I have some questions as I was watching the score here as you were playing. A lot of pianists ask, about the basics of execution of ornaments, is like a glossary. And you were pointing out that while you may be able to look up C.P.E. Bach's treatise, that in the course of the context of playing a piece, you might be doing something differently as you go along. Is that true?
It is true.
Can you elaborate a little on that?
Well, I think that once one is familiar with the piece and with the possibilities of ornamentation, one can feel free to do something that comes to one at the moment.
We look at the very first one, which is called a mordant. It has a slash mark. I'm going to get the terminology right.
Okay.
It has a slash mark, and so most of us pianists who would play it wouldn't have started with a trill on it. You had actually more repercussions on it than the mordant would speak to. Would be B-A-B, correct? So if I
yes, and a mordant. First, let's talk about why they look the way they do, the sign. So when people see them, they can recognize them. It's a trill sign with a slash.
So it's a trill sign with a slash.
It's a trill sign with a slash. That slash is their shorthand for the lower note. That tells you the lower note, you're going down.
Right.
Whereas a trill is just...
A trill by definition is more than just da-da-da. It could be at least...
It can be a short trill. It can be... But a trill is always with the upper note.
Yes.
The upper note of the main note. The note that's written, and then there's the note that you trill with, which is the upper note, and you always start with that upper note. Whereas with a mordant, you always start on the main note. So if it's a C with a sign with a slash, it's CBC. And maybe sometimes you might want to do two.
Right, and that's what I noticed you did. So when you opened the Sarabande, you did not just have B-A-B, you did more than that.
Did I?
Yes, you did more than that. In fact, in the course of playing, a lot of the slash marks, or the mordants, had more notes than just the principal note.
Well, you know it so well at this point that you notice such things.
Yeah, because I wanted the listeners and the observers to know that that's what you had chosen to do because of stylistic or for taste purposes.
It was at the moment.
Okay. And is that part of the Sarabande to be very extemporaneous? To have a sense of improvisation and embellishment in the moment of playing?
It's part of the period.
Okay.
It's part of the period. You're dealing with dance forms. As long as you can convey the feeling of the dance. Already this is a highly stylized dance, but the Sarabande, which originally came from Spain, I believe, it was Sarabande, and it was a wild, lascivious dance, and then it got kind of more dignified. But one thing that it always retained was the stress on the second beat. Bom, bom.
That's interesting.
Bom.
So
Bom,
bom.
But I'm not saying that he does this throughout. What he tends to do, he does it, at some other pieces he does it more. But 1, 2, 3, 1,
right.
2, 3. See, that's the stress. The first main phrase of that bar, those first 4 bars. Then he's going to do the same thing again. The second beat.
It's almost like a sequence. It's a sequence.
Well, he does it exactly the same thing. He stresses the second beat in the second bar of the tune, of the little phrase, the 4-bar phrase. And he goes on, he does the same thing here. Stressing the second beat. But it's a dance thing. Don't.
Yeah, right. Now the double dot was interesting because every time you had a dotted A followed by a 16th, you treated the dotted eighth as a double dot.
Yeah, I played it.
Yeah.
It gives it more.
Right. And that again was the practice of the time?
Yes.
Is that something that C.P.E. Bach clarified?
C.P.E. wrote, a lot of them wrote about it.
Talk a little bit about his treatise or his book.
Well, his treatise on the art of playing keyboard instruments is just the book that everybody should read. First of all, it's tremendously entertaining. He's such a personality, he's so bright, and has such knowledge and talks so freely about it. He also talks about his father, so that's a lot of fun. Then there's a lot of stuff in there about improvisation and figured bass and ornaments, which is just invaluable to anybody who really wants to immerse themselves in this particular period. Anytime you have a note that follows a long space or dotted note, you shorten that note. In the French overture style, is like that too.
And I was talking to you about the fact that when I learned it and listened to various recordings, when the opening comes, most of them that I heard didn't have any kind of trill or extension on it. It was just da 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 dee ya da da instead of dee or dee da dee da da. And you said that was okay if that's the way it was governed by taste.
Also, when you're playing the piano, you might not want to do as many repercussions as you would on this instrument. This one is so much lighter. You know, it's got a different. So if I were playing it on the piano, I might not play it the same way.
I see.
You know, I mean, because it's a bigger, fatter instrument. The sound is you're doing different things. So
let's talk about the appoggiaturas, since
sure.
there's so many. Give us an example of the first one. There's those little parenthesis marks in the second measure.
Okay, first of all, let's
what is
talk about
appoggiatura?
the word
Yes.
appoggiatura,
Right.
which comes from the Italian word appoggiare, to lean. So always you lean on the appoggiatura. It's always louder than the resolution, no matter what the context is. It's always, it's a note that enhances the harmony, provides a little bit of a dissonance, and then following that is the release.
Give us a few examples in the music, and lead into them.
Second bar, with the ornament as well.
If you played that with the appoggiatura as you did, but you played a lower neighbor to the E, what would that sound like instead of as many repercussions as you did?
You mean like?
Yes. Would that be just as well if I chose to do that?
Of course.
Yeah, because I think that's the big resonating issue here, is that nobody has to be boxed in necessarily.
And the thing you have to remember is that it's an immersion in the piece, and it's an immersion in the style that will cause you to make your decisions musical. If you say, well, if you just think of it like from the top, well, I'm going to do this before you even know the piece. No,
Right.
You should learn the piece even without the ornaments.
There seems to be more than two voices. How do you approach in your balance on the harpsichord? How do you balance the bass off against, say, a tenor line that's in there?
Well, I don't, because I can't. There's no color.
Okay,
and
that's-
here the left hand is playing both lines.
Sure.
So I just
You
want to
can't.
make sure that they're both equal, that I don't.
Right. But see, on the piano, we can do that.
But I don't, personally speaking, I don't think there's a hierarchy here. I don't think necessarily your bass should be louder than the tenor. I mean, I don't know, when I play on the piano, do I play the tenor
Well, we should go to
part
the
softer?
piano, too.
I don't really know. Well, if we're talking about piano interpretation, then we should. But otherwise, we should talk about
we
that.
want to compare. Now, there was an ornament that was an interesting one we need to know
Yeah.
more about, which is measure, let's see, 34. And you and I had looked at CPE's work, and we had a quote from it on that, and measure 34.
34.
Yeah, that has that
2,
little
3, 4.
loop on the
the
bottom.
tail.
And then we're
yeah.
going to do the one with the tail in the other direction, but I don't see one here with the tail.
No,
in
I
the
don't
other.
think so. And actually,
have
if
that
you
one.
look at it, it really tells you. Again,
Yeah, it tells
it's the comes from below and then it goes up. So
Right, I see what you're doing. Then we talked a little bit about you speeding up the trill or starting a trill broadly and then speeding up a trill. And you
Expressive.
did that in a few places. I think you did it, I was making mental notes, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. In measure 12, I believe you started with a nice broad flow and then it quickened to that half cadence.
right. Well, you know, when I see a long note like that with a trill,
Can you
I
show?
very rarely. I don't play like that.
Okay, that's
always
interesting.
expressive.
That's beautiful.
You don't want to ever play a trill.
Right.
Ooh,
Right,
horrible.
you're right, that's awful. And
Yeah.
when you hear performances like that, they sound very robotic and mechanical and not musical. At the very end, there's almost a sense of improvisation, or at the very end of the piece, where suddenly we get the triplets that
Yes.
we've never had. And you mentioned something about a source.
Well,
of that.
I just have another version, another edition of this over at the church where I play. And I noticed when I played this for the offertory a couple of weeks ago that third bar from the end was different. It was not as ornate. I'm not sure about whether he actually oversaw printing. I think he did of the clavier Hugo of the French suites. So most likely, this looks like a pretty reliable, it's probably a Henley.
Yes, it
Copy
is.
of
It's
a Henley.
Henley.
They're
It is.
fairly reliable, but if you look in the preface, they're probably going to tell you there were a couple of sources. Because I think they didn't necessarily people who do this, print this music in modern times don't necessarily always just look at one version.
Now, Elaine, you're also a pianist, so I'd like you to go over to the piano and demonstrate what might be slightly different on the piano or what you can do on the piano with this.
Well, let's see what
Let's
happens.
do it.